Welcome everyone to the latest episode of a series I like to call History Speaks. Now, on today's show, we're doing something completely different. We're heading back to the swinging 60s, a period of revolution in social norms, including religion, morality, law and order, clothing, music, drugs, dress, sexuality and formalities, and civil rights, and we can go on and on. Now, there's so many changes over the decade, so if you're a 60s child, a person who just loved the era, then this is certainly for you. Now it's time to reminisce, so let's go back in time. And to help me unravel all the good and possibly not so good is a lady who absolutely loves this time period. So please give a very warm welcome to my guest this week, Liz Frost. Hi Liz, how are you?
Hiya. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
Now, before we get started on today's show, I usually ask a question to break the ice. Now, seeing as we're talking about the 60s this week, I wanted to know if you could go back to that period, what do you think would be your favourite children's toy? And I've actually got a few here that I don't know if obviously you're not a 60s child, but these things kind of exist even to this day. So there was Etch-a-Sketch, Super Bowl. Remember the Super Bowls, the little rubber, you used to bounce them and they'd go 50 feet in the air.
Yeah.
The board game Operation. For me, I'm going to have a bet on this. I'm guessing you're going to say Twister.
I love Twister. Twister's a fantastic party game, but I am a big fan of the Etch-a-Sketch. I actually had an Etch-a-Sketch back in the day, and it's so hard to work, but so satisfying when you manage to draw something on an Etch-a-Sketch.
Yeah.
And the good thing, you just shake it up and it's gone.
I was just going to say, you just shake it up, don't you? And then it's all disappeared. I mean, Battleships was another one. And although these aren't really girls' toys, but Hot Wheels actually started in the 1960s. Anyway.
Oh, I had brothers, so, they definitely would have had that.
Anyway, enough of that. Let's get on to your questions. So, how did you first become interested in the 1960s and what first drew you to the era that you fell in love with?
So obviously I'm not I didn't live through the 60s. I was born in 1975 and but I do remember seeing photographs of my mum, who's now passed, with her beehive and her mini skirts and just she had a purdy cut at one point, the purdy bobs. And she was just super glamorous and remember thinking, wow, she just looks so cool. Um, I lost myself for a long while in a marriage that wasn't very good for me. And when I came out of it, I didn't really know who I was or what I was interested in. And so I just came out into the world a blank slate, really, again. And I fell into it really, really organically. It's almost as though it's something that I've always secretly kind of been interested in, having grown up with music like Nina Simone playing in the house, the Beatles. It's always been there in my background. And I think when I came out of the relationship that wasn't good for me and started to embrace my true self again, it kind of fit into place. It represents freedom, it represents individuality. It's an era that really sits with this new place in my life, and it feels like I belong.
It must have been difficult, I guess, when you transition from a life of marriage and then you're kind of left alone and you've got to wonder then at that point, what do I do? It's kind of like you say, it's a bit of a blank canvas, isn't it? I guess to start off with, and you've got to make a
Yeah,
decision
absolutely.
which way you want to go. Now,
Absolutely. It's not like it's not like I sort of like randomly plucked it, though. It very organically came to me. I always used to wear really long things that covered my figure up and things that, like big loose dresses. And it almost like it gradually crept up on me. It was almost like the 60s happened. My hemlines just got shorter and I started to think, oh, that's nice. And I gradually just really organically grew into it. So it was very natural. But now I'm here. I think this is where I belong. And I don't think I'm ever going back to modern day.
I
So,
don't blame you. Now, talking of fashion, Mary
yes.
Quant was a driving force in the 60s. So what did she have that you think resonates with you?
So she was the pioneer of the miniskirt, which apparently was named after the mini car. Um, so I always thought that the miniskirt came first and the miniskirt, yeah, but it was actually the car that came first, and she named the miniskirt after the car because of that sense of freedom. You can move around more, it's actually showing off more of your body, it's individuality, it's easy and diverse. And I think that it was the first time. I mean, it kind of throws back to the 1920s where there was a sort of first revolution of, women wearing looser clothes and shorter dresses. But this was something on a whole new level. And it went out there. And obviously, women just were absolutely, everyone wore mini skirts. I remember my mum saying, whatever your legs were like, whether you were fat, whether you were thin, whether you were tall, whether you were short, you wore a mini skirt because that was just the best of the best in the 60s. So she had this amazing place called Bazaar in London. And at first, it didn't really kick off. So her and her husband, they actually made it into a bit more of a social experience as well. So they gave away free drinks, they played jazz records to entice people in, and it became a real hub of the 1960s. And then from there, grew things like go-go boots and just those, the whole big circle geometric designs on dresses, that sort of like really space age look. And first of throwaway kind of fast fashion with paper dresses that you would wear, say, 2 or 3 times and then just throw away, disposable dresses, which is, I guess, like your Primark of today.
And even furniture and things like that were quite kind of space age, weren't they? You had these big. I mean, they're beautiful today, and they sell for thousands, don't they? Like some of these perfectly rounded chairs, and even TVs were kind of
Yeah.
like rounded off on the corners. There were no sharp edges. It was all kind of space agey stuff.
I know, and lots of plastic and bright
Yeah.
colours. And I wonder if it's the decade of the moon landing. And so it's no wonder really that the space age has had an
Mm.
influence on culture and furniture and fashion and
Mm.
design.
I mean, Mary Quant's influence went far beyond just fashion because she captured, as you've just said, a spirit, I guess, of creativity and
Yeah,
confidence, and it still resonates today. Now,
yeah.
with such bold changes taking place, it's interesting to think about how this shift in style may have shaped a new sense of identity for women. Women were now free to wear colourful, even playful clothing. Do you think that that contributed to a new femininity?
Yes, definitely, most definitely. Um, it's again harking back to the 20s. It's another revolution of women and their own sense of identity. Models like Twiggy came about, and for the first time, we'd come from the 1960s where it was all corsetry and pulling in and shaping up and very very structured, fitted clothes, to an era of freedom and movement and more androgynous looks, like Twiggy had a really, really slim, almost androgynous look. And she was the first kind of like proper supermodel, if you like. And, they were having haircuts again, like the 1920s, shorter hair, less of the, set and blow dry and um, rollers and high maintenance hair. It was all short haircuts and low maintenance, simple looks. And for the first time, women started to have a bit more financial freedom as well. So they were going out to work again. They weren't forced into marriage at such a young age and children. There were choices. So women could go out and choose to go and have a job, have some disposable income. And fashion was less about, less aimed at the higher classes. It was accessible to everybody. You didn't just have one good Sunday dress. You had a choice of dresses and footwear that you could experiment with. So women were mixing up looks and being creative and carving out their own sense of identity and individuality.
And I think when you mentioned Twiggy there, and in this day and age, we've kind of come full circle, if you like. So now there's more a way of looking at women the full form women, we'll put it that way. There's more choice. It's not just about being thin. In fact, the opposite, I guess, because now the person who looks, the model today, who looks really thin, kind of gets looked down upon, So it changes, it shows how even in 50 years, 60 years, that it changes completely
Mm.
how women are perceived and everything.
I think as well, gone are the days where, a certain look is in. I think now we're much more inclusive. So, people have preferences, but I think that the media are very aware of, you know, shaming people for the way their body looks. Kate Winslet famously speaks out about, some of the feedback that she received when she was in Titanic and how people criticized her body for being overweight. Bridget Jones was considered overweight, and actually, when you look at her body, it was pretty perfect. In wearing that bunny suit in the first Jones movie, and they were saying she wasn't thin. Um, so I think that hopefully people are moving away from the idea that women have to be thin to be attractive, and different sizes, different shapes are being embraced, and also different races, sexualities, and all of that. And I'm hoping that, even with what's going on in America, that people still continue to embrace that nice freedom.
I think it will always continue regardless what happens. I think it'll just continue, and it will evolve, and it will change. It's like anything. From when time started, everything has changed on a yearly basis, really, hasn't it? Well, whatever it is, it's always changed. But the way style has evolved during this time must have had a huge impact on how women express themselves and how society viewed
Yeah.
femininity. Now, of course, fashion wasn't just about individual expression, it was also about a place. And there was one street in particular that defied the era's look and attitude, and that, of course, was Carnaby Street, which is
Mm.
famous for fashion in that time. So, if you could revisit it as it was then, which shops do you think would be top of your list?
Well, Carnaby Street was very much focused around men's tailoring and the mod scene for men. But there were a few boutiques like Lady Jane, Folder and Tuffin, Take Six. Um, if I was in London, I'd really want to go to Bazaar and see Mary Quant's like disco boutique. That would be fantastic. And the brands that I love, Bieber, Jolly Rockers, which was aimed at more youthful. Um, they are just absolutely fantastic. So when I see vintage today and look at the label and think, wow, that's that's an original Bieber or an original Dolly Rockers, it really excites me. But yeah, I'd love to wander down Carnaby Street and visit those lovely boutiques.
I think Carnaby Street is kind of selected because of the way or the amount of people that were around that area of Soho. So there was a lot of filming done back then, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
in the 60s. And I think that was probably the place to be because I don't know if you know this, Carnaby Street dates back to 1685 and it had its first market in the 1820s. So even way back then, clothing and markets in general, were highly thought of in the area, I guess. And the other thing is that just around the corner was the famous Marquee Club, but we'll talk about the music scene a little bit later. Now, I think it's fair to say that the era had a distinct energy, and stepping back into it would be an incredible experience, especially when it comes to personal style. Now, it wasn't only fashion that changed, hairstyles became popular with people like Vidal Sassoon creating the bob cut. So, which style resonates with you the most?
I am much more of the free love era of the 60s, the loose hair, the low maintenance, unkempt look. But I love, on other people, I love to see that sleek bob and the purdy cuts and the really cool, like geometrical styles. They just don't suit me. But yeah, there's some fantastic hairstyles out there. And sorry, like Peggy Moffat, sporting the five point cut. and just, the angled bobs, and they just looked fantastic and perfection. And they were, Vidal Sassoon based the bob on about Bauhaus sort of like architectural design. So he'd taken the inspiration from the Bauhaus like style of architecture in its precision, and the cut is absolutely precise.
So was the purdy cut, was that a 60s thing, the purdy cut, or was it something that just came a little bit
I'm not
later in
sure
the
if it's like
60s?
an extension of the 5-point cut. It's sort of, where it kind of like a bowl cut, almost like a
Yeah.
bob that went right the way round, um, and just like came in, and not everyone can carry it off. My mum had one and she looked absolutely fantastic with it. Just like super glossy, sleek hair, perfect. But obviously my hair is wild and crazy and it could never stay tamed in a bob. So
I think hair's like anything, and it's a personal choice. And I
yeah,
mean, I've got pictures of me, which I'm not going to show you because, like, but I used to have really long curly hair, like when
afterwards.
back in the day, sort of thing. And it's just it was just something I loved. I absolutely loved it, and I kept it for quite a long time. But then, obviously, I thought I've got to cut it off. I've got to look more my age, sort of thing, rather than looking like a
Where does that come from? I mean, the thing is, what is looking your age? There's a whole thing at the moment where you shouldn't
yeah.
wear, people are saying you shouldn't wear a miniskirt over 50 as a woman. And I strongly disagree with all of that, dressing for your age, looking for your age. How do you stand on that?
I mean,
Sorry,
with my hair,
you're supposed to be interviewing me, aren't you?
with my hair, I would have looked like. I mean, Brian May probably dyes his hair now. I don't know, but I could have dyed it and dyed it and dyed it and kept it, but I don't know. It's just easier just to have it like this now. So
Well,
I
it
don't,
suits you. It
it's a
suits
personal
you.
choice,
You
isn't
could have
it?
totally rocked like a silver Brian May as well, like a
Mm,
massive long trucker Brian May style. That
I
would have
could,
looked awesome.
I could, but no, not now. I don't think. But anyway, let's move on. Yeah, because
There
style.
were lots of the afros as well, weren't there, in the 60s?
Yeah,
Lots of
yeah,
people like grew afros, and
yeah.
I just think that's fantastic as well.
Afros are good. I think you just need the hair for it, don't you?
Gee.
I think you've got to have. Again, it's not always a personal choice because if you don't have the hair, if the hair's not thick enough, it's very difficult to curl or do anything with it. It's just
Yeah.
dead flat, isn't it? It just kind of sticks to your head if it's fine. But anyway, I might show you that picture one day. With my long hair. I guess style has always been a powerful form of self-expression, as we just mentioned there, influencing not just how people look, but how they felt about themselves. Now, as trends evolved, so did cultural movements, which shaped attitudes and lifestyles in ways that went far beyond appearance. Now, the hippie culture spread quickly through the UK in the 60s. How do you think it affected women of the time?
There was a lot of freedom, wasn't there, with the hippie culture? It was sort of like a rebellion against like the consumerism that came, after the war. People were buying, 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 and it was a rejection of that and saying, no, we don't need things. We need to strip ourselves back to a bit more natural. We're going to wear natural fibers. We're going to let our hair go loose and free. We are going to sleep with whoever we want to. We're going to have sex without being married. We're not going to, feel tied to one person. We're going to sleep with multiple people. And so, in one way, it was free love was a huge freedom. In some other ways, though, not all women were down with that, and there was a huge pressure that came along with that. If you weren't up for, sleeping with multiple partners, um, you were sort of frigid, or, it was all like, "Oh, relax, you've got to, you know, just go with it." And some people took advantage of this, dominant men even opened communes, with lots of people like they would just have loads of sex with each other. So, there were dual sides to that, but ultimately it opened up choice, which is always a good thing. And obviously then the pill came into force, which gave women extra choices about, when they had children, and freedom to choose how they live their life and take control of their fertility as well.
I mean, the shifting social landscape of the 60s brought about a wave of cultural change and it reshaped attitudes and expectations. So, with these changes, a sense of liberation started to take hold, opening up, I guess, new possibilities for many. Now, for the first time, this newfound freedom spread across the land. But do you think this really helped women become more independent based on what you've just said?
Yeah, I think having a choice is always a good thing. Culturally, there was a lot of pressure, like I say, to conform to this new way. So, in some ways, with the communes and things like that, some women were coming out of one form of oppression into another form of oppression. But ultimately, deep down, with the freedom and the choice comes the opportunity to choose what the way you want to live. So I think ultimately it is a good thing.
Mm. I mean, as society, it did begin to shift, and there were obviously new opportunities and ways of thinking that started to reshape daily life. Now, with that
Yeah.
change came evolving ideas about personal relationships and the role of authority in private matters. And as you mentioned, free love was a liberal philosophy with the hope of, I guess, separating the state from sexual and romantic matters. How would that have affected people of the era, given that it's entwined with feminism?
Yeah. I think, it was the youth that it really impacted because, this was the first generation of youth that were stepping away from what their parents and what authority wanted for them and carving their own path. So they were taking charge of their style, how they lived their lives, making choices for themselves, and being creative and individual. So in that sense, it was an extremely freeing era, and it will have paved the way for lots of new societal changes. Um, but that, yeah, the quick shift from marriage and the structure that the state and families imposed will have been a shock for some, a shock to the system for some, and won't have felt necessarily that comfortable. Um, but yes, also just, in terms of safety and, it's risky, isn't it?
Mm.
Stepping away and carving a new path is always risky, but ultimately, choice is good.
Do you think that was the first time that marriage sort of started to maybe fade a little into the background?
Well, I mean, when you look back at like Henry VIII, just um, people have people have always had affairs, and to find a marriage that truly you're in love with each other for life, that's kind of rare. Lots of
Mm.
people are in marriages for convenience sake. And especially, in my personal situation, having come out of a marriage, and talking to other people who perhaps aren't as happy as you once thought they were, um, people stick at marriage because they feel they have to. And yeah, I think the idea, it feels like so rebellious to step away from marriage as an ideal, doesn't it?
Mm.
But actually, I think the 60s, provided that choice, for people not to get married and for it not to be frowned upon.
And
Because,
I
being
think
tied to another person for your whole life when perhaps they're not, sometimes marriages of convenience still happened even in the 1950s. Somebody would be pushing, I don't know, pushing 20, pushing 20 even, and thinking, I'd better knuckle down and get married. I don't want to be left on the shelf.
mm,
And thankfully that's not something that's alive today.
no, it's completely it's gone because I think you'll probably find, and there's nothing wrong with marriage. I'm not, saying it's a bad thing, but I think more people or couples are quite happily living together without that ultimate connection, if you like, especially today, anyway. So,
Yeah.
life goes on, doesn't it? But it's
Yeah.
again, it's something that kind of changes, and marriage may one day come back again as a really strong influence on people.
Yeah. Well, marriage is a good way to control people, isn't it?
Mm,
Partnering people up. It keeps ties a handle on people,
mm,
and it creates a family unit. It makes sense societal wise for people to get married. It's beneficial, isn't it?
yeah.
But not all individuals are happy with the same person for their whole life, and not all marriages are happy. And I think it's again good to just have a choice and freedom to, you know, to choose to get married and to choose to no longer be married, or
Mm,
to choose to never get married if that's what you want.
mm. I think challenging societal norms always comes with consequences anyway, and those embracing new ideas often had to navigate both progress and resistance. Now, as attitudes toward relationships and personal freedom shifted, so too did the conversation around reproductive rights and control over one's body. The sexual revolution was not without its problems, and to counteract any unwanted babies, the pill was first introduced in 1967. Do you think this form of birth control helped or hindered women at the time?
I think it definitely helped them. It gave them the freedom to decide things about their reproductive health. Their, they got to choose whether they wanted to have children yet or not, or whether they wanted to have children at all. It gave them control over their own body. But there were side effects, and there still are, weight gain and bloating and all the side effects that come with the pill, depression and things like that are very real. And yeah, women of the era in the 60s largely still wanted to do it despite the side effects because of the freedom it gave them. Of course, the downsides of the pill is that there's no protection against sexually transmitted diseases. So it did leave people open to catching all sorts of nasties, especially with free love going on. So and that's always the downside, isn't it? Without using sort of barrier protection.
Yeah. And it's something that's still around today, isn't it? There's so
Yeah.
much in the news, even now, about, STDs and things like that. And it's quite off putting, really, because it's like you don't really want to go out anymore and meet somebody, and you think, oh no, if we get to that point, what do we do? You know what I mean? It
It's a bit of a
can
turn
be.
up, isn't it? Have you got gonorrhea? Like,
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of the ones that are around, well, they've always been around, I guess, but a lot of them, people don't even know they've got them.
I
That's
know, I know.
that's one
I've
of the
never had one, but yeah, it can't be nice. It's kind of mortifying, isn't it, as well?
mm,
Because you've had an intimate encounter where you've trusted somebody, and it's a reminder that they've recently picked that up from somebody else. But it's not. It's just not nice.
now social change was happening on so many fronts during this time and reshaping attitudes and opportunities in ways that were both liberating and complex. Now, alongside these shifts, the cultural landscape was also undergoing a revolution, with music playing a huge role defining the era. And one of the biggest defining moments was music with bands like the Beatles gaining worldwide success. Now, for yourself, what are your favourite musicians of that particular time?
Obviously, I love the Beatles. They were really defined the era, didn't they? But I also love the Rolling Stones as well as a juxtaposition. I love people like Simon and Garfunkel. I was very into Nina Simone as well. Like she was, my mum used to play a lot of her in the house, and so that kind of like sort of folk sort of vibe. That's where I sit. I love 60s sort of folk music.
And it's not, and it's still popular today, isn't it? But there's still an audience out there for it. Even like the Rolling Stones can still fill out an arena. It's
I
amazing,
know.
really.
I know. Mick Jagger's absolutely amazing up there, and Paul McCartney as well. Like
Yeah,
they're just amazing. Still got it, still got their voices, still got the energy.
it's a pity John's still not around, isn't it?
Angelo.
Lennon. I went to New York last year. It was because we're in March, aren't we now? Yeah, about middle of last year, and the strawberry fields, and they've got you can go and see. There's a big, massive plaque in the floor that
Oh,
commemorates
amazing.
him.
Yeah.
And there's a building where he lived with Yoko, and apparently, even though when he obviously died, she I think lived there for a period of time, but then she moved on. But the rest of the tenants, it's such an exclusive building. They don't allow anybody in just because you're a star. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have to be kind of vetted. It's really weird.
Wow.
It's a really
So
amazing
people
place.
can live there, but you have to be vetted first.
People can live there, obviously, yeah. And I think John and Yoko's place is still there. But to live there, it's down to the rest of the community in that block as to whether they allow you. And I think people like Madonna have even
Wow.
tried to get in, and they can't get in. So
Imagine having a flat to rent out
yeah,
and John Lennon rents it out. John Lennon's like, "Yeah, I'll take it." Like,
yeah,
that'd be crazy. Or Madonna, it would be absolutely bonkers, wouldn't
yeah,
it? If
yeah.
that was your place and you rented it out to someone like that.
But as far as I'm aware, it's and the guy who was it was on one of these like a little tour around Central Park, which is where John Lennon's the strawberry fields and all this sort of stuff is what they've created for him. But they were
Yeah.
explaining about this building in the background, and that's where they used to live. And as far as I'm aware, it's still there. The flat's still there, and probably the furnishings are still there. But nobody will,
Yeah.
unless somebody comes up with, I don't know, they really want somebody to live there. They're not going to allow it. And this is like the residents of that particular place. They all just get together, which is amazing. But anyway,
Yeah.
we'll move
I
on.
love how I love how loyal. Well, I mean, I don't know if they were loyal, like they probably did sleep with other people, but how much John Lennon loved Yoko and how much Paul loved Linda, and you just see that love, and it's just like, wow, they were just inseparable and adored them, didn't they?
And
I
it
just think
goes to
that's really
prove if there's anything about relationships and things like that, it's definitely in the beauty. Is definitely in the eye of the beholder. Because when you look at John at the side of Yoko, they look so different, don't they? It's like
I know, but you can kind of see it, like, and Linda as well, like, you can see it. You can see when you can see videos of them, and you can sort of see them through each other's eyes, and I think that's really beautiful as well.
there's definitely a connection there.
Mm.
I think the thing with as like us as commoners, if you like, we look at couples and we think how, or why, but we don't know the inner workings of that person, do we, or those
Yeah.
people, and it's really difficult because some people just connect, just
And it's really
connect.
hard in this day and age because it's all apps, isn't it? It's all Tinder and Bumble and
Yeah,
stuff. You're swiping on looks based on looks alone.
yeah.
So you're not really getting that vibe of what person's like in person. It could be pheromones, it can be, a sense of humor, it could be the way they look at you, and you don't get that from apps.
It
So
could just be a
it's
mutual
really hard.
interest in something as well, could it? Yeah,
Yeah,
it could be anything.
absolutely.
It's a million and one things that it could be that attracts two people to become one, if you like. But
Yeah.
anyway, as we know, the era was filled with groundbreaking changes, not just in music, but across society as a whole. And as people embraced new sounds, they were also witnessing a shift in the roles and expectations of women, reshaping the cultural landscape in ways that would leave a lasting impact. Now, feminism became more influential. Women secured better jobs, moved away from home, giving them a new opportunity. How do you see the culture change in its new movement?
Sorry, the last bit cut out there.
Oh, sorry. How did you see the culture change in its new movement?
I think a lot of it came from women sort of is securing jobs and going out to work and no longer being forced into that, homemaker role of the 1950s. So they were out in the workplace and they were able to carve out niches for themselves. So they were earning their own money. They were making their own choices about what they wanted to spend that on. They were, still very much in a family setting, but they were discovering new interests, and they had the sexual freedom. They had the choices about contraception and things like that. So all those choices, contributed to women just feeling more confident in their own place, more to step out of their comfort zone, and it just helped women step out of the shadow of their partners a bit. So I think very much in the 1950s and before, women were very much in the shadow of their husband, their father, and then their husband, um, kind of like an accessory to that. And they became people in their own right, stepping forward and, you know, making their own choices and carving their own place.
I think the days of "I, honey, I'm home" kind of
Mm.
completely shifted, didn't they? I'm not saying that didn't happen because I think it did, and men were still, I guess, the breadwinner even in the '60s, and
Yeah,
most of the women, I would imagine, were housewives who would stay at home and look after the children. But the '60s definitely started to change that perception of
yeah,
what a woman was capable of and how she could move forward and start, I guess, living her own life a little bit more and having a little
yeah.
bit more freedom and stuff like that.
And anyone that's a parent knows that it's easier to go to work and do a day's work in an office than it is to stay home and take care of a child. So that they were getting that sense of freedom, that almost break from that. So yeah, it was a case of having that freedom and getting their life back a little bit. But women were going out and doing jobs back then that probably were things like secretarial or admin based, while the men were still taking the bigger, managerial jobs and things like that. Whereas, and men were still very much getting paid more. So it's only really now that we're starting to see a little bit more equality coming in to the workplace, where women are starting to step into those more senior roles. And, there's still gender inequality in pay, unbelievably so. So women are still getting paid less for the same jobs as men overall, but that gap is closing and women are becoming more equal in the workplace. And the choices now are, so wide. You know, women can choose to have children and go to work, have it all if they want to.
And I mean, like, even the change over the last, well, it's from 1900 to what it is now, 2025, the change for women
Mm.
has been a long road. It's been a long struggle from like the suffragette time when they were just trying to get a vote to where we're at now. And you can see ladies who are airline pilots. So it just
Yeah.
shows how it's changed. But like you say, there is still a little bit of inequality.
Mm.
I think in sport's probably a good thing to look at because I think such as tennis and things like that, they're trying to level it up a little bit now with the prizes that they're awarding for a tournament. So like I think the men and the women are virtually getting the same amount now, whereas probably 20 years ago there was still that discrepancy between what the men would be awarded and what women would get. So it's
I
just
wonder if it's because of the audiences, because men are probably the biggest watchers of sport, and that's how the money's made, isn't it? The games that you
yeah.
watch and the TV, etc. Um, and unfortunately, most men would prefer to watch men playing the sport than they would prefer to watch women. So yeah, I wonder if there's something in that.
As long as
That's
they
changing
don't,
though.
as long as they don't try and mix it and have like football with half a team of men and half a team of women, it just
I mean,
wouldn't
it's
work.
just never going to work, is
It's
it?
never
Because
going to
it's just
work. It's just and
men are physically stronger. Their
yeah,
bodies are different. It's there's no getting away from that. That's a difference that's
uh,
never
uh,
gonna level out.
And I'm never going to get into the what we've just had over the last couple of years about the he and her and him and whatever they call themselves, all these pronouns, because it's just
Do you know what?
ridiculous.
I think it's wonderful. I think it's absolutely wonderful that people can call themselves whatever they want to, and that gender's not fluid, and that you can identify with however you want to. I think it's wonderful.
Well, I'm not against people calling themselves, but I'm thinking in terms of like sporting activities, when you've got a man who's had a sex change up against a woman, I think like it's wrong. It's just completely wrong. So
Such a
in
blurry
those
line there,
terms,
isn't there?
it's just wrong in that way. But like, yeah, people can call themselves whatever they want. But you could call
Yeah,
yourself,
it's
what would you call it?
that's such a contentious issue, isn't it?
Yeah,
And there's so many arguments on both sides for that.
mm,
It's such a complicated issue, isn't it?
it is. It is. Anyway, the shifting roles of women during this time opened up new possibilities and reshaped expectations in ways that were truly transformative. Now, looking back, it's clear that certain moments or movements had a profound impact on accelerating this change. The 60s was an incredible era and a defining decade for the British woman. What do you think was the real game changer for women back in that time?
Probably going out to work. I think that's going to change the lives of so many women. Going out to work and having access to the pill. Those two things are huge for women and their independence.
And it would have been quite an eye opener, I guess, for some of the men to see the women go out to work in those days. Because
Yeah,
it was something they wouldn't be used to at all.
yeah. Like, who's going to make my dinner? Who's going to look
Yeah.
after the kids?
I don't even know if babysitters were around in the 1960s. Maybe
I
they were.
know.
Maybe they were because there were more children being produced. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, my nan had 14 brothers and sisters. I mean, it's crazy the amount of kids that people used to have compared to now, where it's on average one, isn't it? One or two
Mm.
maximum.
And I think the reason for that is because if you go back, I don't know, you can go back 100 years, 200 years, they always had like 10 children, didn't they? But
Yeah.
then again, they didn't have a TV. And then again, they
Oh,
didn't
but
have a.
they used to die as well, didn't they? The children, they used to have so many because lots of them used to die. They didn't
Yeah,
survive.
yeah. And
So
there were no
you'd
mobile
you'd
phones.
have loads to hope that some of them survived, like a litter of cats or something. But now, chances are your baby's going to survive if you have a child in this day and age, isn't it? Unless there's any congenital issues.
But again, there's more distractions today, and I think that probably is another reason why people just don't, have so many children. There's just too many distractions
Yeah, more
around the world.
TV, less sex.
Well, people have, when you like even things like just going to see a film.
Uh,
There were no cinemas over 100 years ago. There were. It was just like it was just kind of starting out at that point, weren't it? So when
yeah,
like cinema became a thing, I guess that had an impact as well. And it's like, I don't know, books have always been around, but I'm sure people would put a book down if they had something else that,
the
might be
opportunity to run.
a bit more enjoyable sort of thing. But
Yeah,
that's what I think. I just think that because there was no, when you watch some of these old, not old, but like dramatizations of times gone past, and they put it all into an hour. But in reality, that could have been 5 years.
um,
So it must have been quite boring, I guess, Go back to
yeah.
Henry VIII or something like that. I mean, what else do you
They had to
do?
talk to each other, didn't they? I mean, people had to have conversations
Mm,
because there was nothing else to do,
mhm,
conversations or sex. And if you didn't have contraception, which they didn't have back in the day, did they?
no.
Or very limited kind of rudimentary contraception.
Mm,
So you practically, every time you decided you were going to have sex, you were at risk of falling pregnant. So it's no wonder that women of reproductive age just continue to have children until the menopause,
mm.
and then they died.
Yeah. It's like any story, and it all ends happily and everything. But again, so
Exactly.
the changes that unfolded during that decade reshaped society, as we've talked about, in ways that still impact us today. Now,
Yeah.
with such a dramatic shift in attitudes and expectations, it's no surprise that some saw this period as a time of rebellion and uncertainty.
Mm.
In the 1960s, people first began to challenge, question authority. So, were the 60s, do you think, a period of time that just got out of control?
I mean, there were lots of protests, weren't there, and things like that. But actually, it was really beautiful as well. I mean, I don't know if you know where the term flower power comes from, but it was a photographer called Bernie Boston. Took a photograph of people were at the Pentagon protesting the Vietnam War, so towards the end. And there was this guy called George Harris who famously had carnations and he popped them down the barrels of the gun, and that's where the term flower power came from. So with that rebellion um, came a sense of love, and let's stop war, and there was a sense of like, okay, we're reclaiming our independence, but it wasn't in a violent way. It was in a creative, in a positive way. So, no, I think it was a good thing. It wasn't out of control. It was, yeah, I mean, it was out of control, but the fact that it was out of control was a good thing because it helped society progress and it helped us step away from the constraints of the 1950s and embrace individuality. And lots of subcultures will have come off of that individuality that rebellion brought along.
And I think people power is something that's been with us for a long time. And I think people power is very underestimated by the powers that be. If you go back to, say, Tiananmen Square and the guy stood in front of the tank, um, and the recent problems that we've had with the US and Ukraine and Russia, and that again is starting to kind of inject in people a passion that they don't want to see these types of things continue. Do you think that, I'm not saying the 60s are going to come back in that sort of respect, but do you think a people power is something that is just going to, that could come back and can inspire maybe some of these leaders we've got around today just to take a step back and think, people are right?
I mean, I think that people are people have got a bigger platform to voice themselves than ever before.
Mm.
Anyone, anywhere can record a YouTube video and put it online and get it out there or get it on social media. Everyone has a voice today. So that's the beauty of today's world is that we can speak out. Things could go viral. We can spread the word. Um, it is a little more diluted because of that. But with the flower power, acts of love are always more powerful than acts of violence. So people will always respect the man that stands in front of a tank, the single man that stands in front of a tank, more than the person that bombs an entire city, because people want love, not war.
And I think the thing as well today, as you say, news is so accessible to the minute now, rather than 60 years ago, it was kind of, it might take 2 or 3 days for word to come through from any part of the world. So it's
Yeah.
everything's more instant today, and obviously has an impact on everybody. And like you said, everybody can have a have a say on whatever, whether they agree or disagree, or they can say whatever they like. Now the
Even
90s,
like that fish, do you remember that puffer fish, that deep sea, not puffer fish, violet, violet fish, that rose to the surface? Like they live in the depths of the sea, so deep that there's no light, there's no natural light, and somebody found this fish floating near the surface, and of course it's blind, it can't see because it doesn't need eyes. Yes, there's no light down there. And it died. And everyone just says it's just been everywhere on the internet. Oh, he just wanted a glimpse of the light before he died. And like, you know, putting there a sort of anthropomorphization, like, I can't think of the word, anthropomorphizing him. But really, he probably just lost his way, and he's like probably was in excruciating pain because the the
But
song would have been
they
just
do
awful
say
when he
when you're
died.
about to go, don't they, that you should be walking towards the lights, and
Towards
maybe
the
he
light.
was swimming
But
towards the light.
yeah,
Who
just this little
knows?
thing has caused, it's gone viral on the internet for floating towards the surface, towards the light. So, and news is so international as well. So you can find out what's happening anywhere in the world. It's not confined to your own country. The world is so small now and so connected that everyone knows what's going on everywhere and has an opinion on it. So
The 1960s were a time, as we've talked about, of immense change, with people pushing boundaries, reshaping society in ways that had never been seen before. Now, looking back, it all seemed to happen at such a rapid pace that it must have felt like history was being rewritten overnight. For you, was the 1960s a decade that if you blinked, you would have missed it?
yes and no. I mean, I think that it seemed to go quick at the time. When you look back, it was just 10 years. Um, but the changes that happened in that time and the styles are still iconic today. The music, the attitudes, they're going to leave a lasting impression on history. So even though it was only 10 years, it's had an impact that's been way greater.
Right. Now, it's time to talk about everything, Liz. So, tell us about your 60s gear. Oh, and before we go any further, I'll just show people this. And your little, oh, where are we? Can everybody see that? Cool little vintage,
Vintage Flea, brilliant,
little
brilliant.
vintage leaf collection. And of course, any social media sites you'd like to share.
So I have a social media account called Little Vintage Flea. And it's inspiration for styling your 60s wardrobe. My wardrobe is completely 60s and 70s. So it's inspiration about styling your 60s wardrobe and just playing lots of 60s music and fun and merriment and just a really nice place to hang out. And sometimes you might be able to buy some of my clothes as well.
Fantastic. And that's, if people come by and they want to buy something, I don't know, you do plenty of videos of you wearing that 60s gear. So it's really interesting. And don't forget, everybody, all of Liz's links will be in that description box below. So thank you so much, Liz, for joining me today and sharing your incredible insights on the 1960s. Your passion and deep knowledge brought so much life to the conversation, and I truly appreciated every moment that we spent diving into that transformative era. And it feels like we were able to connect with the heart of a decade that changed so much, and your honest reflections made it all the more special.
Thanks for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And as always, to everyone who's tuned in today, thank you so much. We've still got some more incredible guests coming on History Speaks. So if you love history, you'll love History Roadshow. And don't forget to like, which is one of these, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our historical stories. So until next time, keep exploring the past with us, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.